tape recorder. Like, we can now really keep in books records of everything. And they had this idea of, he was very influenced by Bacon, that McLuhan also talks about. Bacon, how do you call it?
You mean VICO, Vico?
Yes, they had this idea of creating a sort of encyclopedia, and he called it the Pansophia.
Yeah.
Like, you shouldn't be fragmented and just limit yourself to learn about one subject. They thought you should learn as much as you could. And this was the book was a way of recording and replay and remixing. It was a type of tape. And yes, it will serve the same function as the taping.
Well, let me check. And Vico, they were grammarians, what McLuhan calls grammarians. They believed in being encyclopedic. So let me
because they thought this recording and replay and remixing was the only way to gain a comprehensive knowledge of your whole environment and of yourself. So
the book was?
Well, no, the encyclopedia, the recording, the studying and replaying of these records and remixing of ideas.
The archive. Okay, yeah. So Vico would. It's not that. Vico came later. So Vico was influenced by Comenius, is what you're saying. Comenius. He can't be Vico influenced Comenius. Comenius influenced Vico. Does that sound right?
Okay.
Yeah, because Vico wasn't born till 1668. And Comenius was born.
Well, maybe I got confused because they sort of have a lot of similarities also in their program of creating this type of encyclopedia of recording all knowledge available, and they thought it was possible for a man to learn everything that there is.
Right. Now, Vico might have been a bit different in originality than Comenius, because Vico decided that language contained the history. Poetry and language, you look into language, he was like a linguist, and that would contain the knowledge of the race. That I don't know if that's, I guess he means written language, so the value of the book and preserving, but I'm not an expert on Comenius or Vico, but they are both encyclopedic grammarians. They have the same agenda on that level. They're not into specialisms. The grand illusion. Okay, so Zappa is not a specialist. He's an encyclopedic grammarian in what he allows sound-wise to enter his imagination and media-wise. So there's a parallel between Comenius and Zappa. But if Zappa, Comenius is saying, well, if nothing can be present anymore, he might say, well, the book saves something, but people don't see that. They see the book as getting in the way of recording the present. It's not fast enough. So Zappa, he's looking at the registration of the moment and quite cynical about it and not relying on it. He's going to improvise a new thing every night, every concert, and he's exploring digital dust. The nothingness of the present is an aspect of Zappa's themes that makes him prophetic or relevant to today, as this Pale of Granada describes the presencing of presence. Like Zappa would record everything, and then in his concerts replay the day, what happened during the day in the particular concert, in that particular town, adapting whatever happened with the band or other events, and changing the lyrics of his songs or the concepts that he was communicating musically. So he was acting out the presencing of the presence. Did that go too far from the Comenius theme?
No.
No?
No, I mean, he was looking for a way of people being aware of their environment, which in his eyes include both the first, the second nature, and God. And he thought
Zappa did the same thing, you know. Remember, Zappa says in his manifesto, awareness of God. He's including God in his concept, but it's not a Catholic God or not the God that theology presents, unless he meant that concept was what he wanted to satirize. He's just quoting who is...
It's the thing that there is this thingness, the thingness that McLuhan also talked about, and the light.
Right.
There are like these aspects of our environment. One is the outer kingdom, and the other is this mystery landscape that men are aware of.
I found the thingness quotes. I made note of them. I wanted to read them to you because we talked a bit about this, and you may have quoted something, but just to repeat them, McLuhan says, and this we're keeping Zappa's thing fish in mind. McLuhan says, the revelation is of thing. The revelation is of thing, not theory. And where revelation reveals actual thingness, you are not dealing with concept. The thingness revealed in Christianity has always been a scandal to the conceptualist. It has always been incredible. This issue is raised in the book of Job, where faith and understanding were put at totally opposite poles. Job was not working on a theory, but on a direct percept. All understanding was against him. All concept was against him. He was directly perceiving a reality, one revealed to him. Excuse me. Then McLuhan says, I can say that I do not think of God as a concept, but as an immediate and ever-present fact, an occasion for continuous dialogue. Well, today, people are dealing with existence as an ever-present fact and an occasion for a dialogue because they keep recording what's going on and texting back to it. Then the third quote, McLuhan says, I don't think concepts have any relevance in religion. Analogy is not a concept. It is resonance, and it is inclusive. And that's before the digital era. So then there's another quote of thingness. Let me see if I can find it. You can speak on while I look for it. Is that the quote you came up with? The one I just said? Yeah, that's a different one.
Yes, I don't have it here.
Right.
Yes, I think I saw it in the medium is the light.
Yes, that's where a lot of this thingness quote, thingness talk is coming from.
Yes, and also the aspect that was not really talked about when McLuhan was like his explorations of the mystery landscape.
Yeah.
He actually did a lot of explorations of the occult and the thingness, because he had a weird experience. I was reading that he was praying for 3 years, and he will just say, speak to me, or say something, or something like that.
Show me a sign.
And then he had this experience, and he said if he had it before, when he was younger, he would have become a priest. Yeah. And I don't know what this experience was, but he did a lot of explorations of this other aspect that we call the non-physical.
That was what his experience was. According to Ion, his parallel worlding is what really shook him up. I don't think a Catholic would like me saying that, but Ion documented 3 times that Marshall got this experience. And if it wasn't the Catholic sign from God, it was another reality that he was enjoying.
Yes, and we are aware of the non-physical and the mystery landscape, but most of the vorticists and scientists, many people have this type of experiences that I said it's normal. It's nothing special. It's part of your normal. So the anomalies are anomalies. It's nothing special, but because until now we could not really understand what is that about, and
well, let me say something.
Maybe it's only fantasy, or that we are crazy or whatever. And
no, here's the division, and McLuhan pointed this out, that the dialectical scientist, the non-grammarian, the non-mystical, the practical empiricist, the laboratory guy, he considered the mystery landscape an anomaly. So they were called anomalous. So they ignored anomalies or tried to disprove anomalies. That's what we call science, as it unfolded 100 years ago. The other side, the guys who accepted anomaly as normal, they were called the analogists, or the analogy meaning something like metaphor. They understand the symbolic nature of experience, so they would incorporate more into it. They'd allow more to be acknowledged because it was, in the end, an analogy of something. So McLuhan was looking for an analogy, a sign, as an analogist, and he was not interested in the anomalous. He'd study them, but it's interesting, Ian talks about anomalies. That's the term for those that are not interested in anomalies or interested in disproving them. So here's the quote from the other quote on thingness, and you may have seen this. It's from The Medium and the Light. McLuhan says, all these terms mean the same thing. They mean that the thingness of things must come through them at you and must not be reported and described. So the anomalous would try to report and do something with anomalies. But what's science say? Prove that it can't be. So that would be reporting and describing. McLuhan's saying when you encounter thingness, you must not report and describe. But you've got millions of people now don't know if you can call it reporting, they are registering the present as if it's an anomaly in itself. Now, I think we got Bert here. Are you here, Bert? There's an anonymous here that... No Bert yet. Okay, unless he's on mute. So you're welcome to say something, Roxy, about the anomalous versus the analogous.
Yes, but also Zappa was mentioning this mystery landscape with a lot of humor.
Yeah. Zappa pretended to be the scientist. He pretended to be the anomalous, watching what the non-rational were experiencing. He always said that he was advocating people to return to a rationality. But in McLuhan's sense, and the Vortis sense, it was a comprehensive rationality, not limiting the irrational, because he is seen as a completely irrational musician. Many times I heard major media commentators. I think of the Canadian talk show host Peter Zosky. He was the Johnny Carson of Canada, a bland Canadian version for many years. And Zappa came up because he interviewed Flo and Eddie, the two ex-Turtles that were in Zappa's band, years later. And he said, what was it like playing for a composer or a musician who was insane? That's what Zosky said. He said, the music is insane. And that was a common perception of Zappa. So here's Zappa advocating, it's just like Finney's wig. The eyes must be seen, bring the book back, and he makes an unreadable book. So he cancels out the purpose of making a book that would stay and have reading power. Zappa does the same thing. I'm all for returning to a rational understanding of society, and then he is seen as a complete irrationalist.
Yes, but it's interesting that then his last work was the Civilization
Phase 3.
Phase number 3, and there he exposes his ideas of frequency, of the big note, and all coming from
the order, underlying order that he, but it was not a visually biased order. It was a tactile order. So how would you bring Comenius into this? Is it just because Comenius understood a new medium was an environment, and everybody was subject to it, so why not let the kids be educated?
Also his idea of the senses interacting together, that McLuhan wrote, for example, in The Global Village, that consciousness is sort of a projection to the outside of an inner synesthesia.
Yeah. That inner synesthesia.
Because of media, we have the impression that one sense dominates, but it's actually we're perceiving with all senses all the time, and it's this interaction that creates our perception. And the perception is affected by each medium, and somehow what I call the vortices are trying to make you aware of the technologies, the vortex, your environment, and how to keep this perception in balance, not to be sick by all these, and not to let
anomalies.
Your mind dominate. Yes, and accept both the left and the side and the right side of the brain, and
not accept, observe them from the middle position, the tactile position.
Yes, because, for example, one of the things I like about the Chambord Castle, on one side, is like very rational. You have the impression of perfect symmetry, of mathematical order, balance, of beauty. But then when people start studying the castle, there's a lot of anomalies. There is no perfect symmetry. There are many inversions. And it's both very artistic and very fantastic and very rational. And it's like accepting this both sides of your brain and let them work together, not just going to being rational or just being
irrational.
An artist, irrational, and the mystery landscape. And it's this awareness of your complete being, of your complete perception, that you make this concept of the holeopathic.
Holeopathic.
That people like Zappa and you and Joyce and McLuhan and Comenius, they're trying to make people aware of their environment and themselves in a comprehensive way without fragmenting. Like, we need this integration again, because we had been fragmenting, especially.
Listen. I'm reminded this is neither right hemisphere nor left hemisphere. You can be in the third position, which can be the corpus callosum in the structure of the brain, the part of the brain that fosters dialogue between the right and left hemisphere. So you take this quote from Twin Peaks, where Mike, the one-armed man, he's been involved with some magical rituals with Bob. And so at a key point, Mike says, through the darkness of future past, the magician longs to see one chance out between two worlds, fire walk with me. So this position about being between two worlds is the I don't want to say ascended or enlightened, but is the position that the vortices recommend. You're not, it's almost like a triangulation. But the between two worlds, in the gap, in the interval, is the tactile interval, and that's where the vortices in McLuhan, Zappa, and do you see that in Comenius? He's recommending a third position, not in secular pagan education, nor in God, somewhere in between.
Yes, because, for example, he said it is important to engage in gardening. And, for example, here in Riksdag, the Bohemians have a garden. On one side is the wild nature, the nature as God created it. It's perfect like this.
Yeah.
And they leave it to grow as it wants. And on the other side...
That's half the garden. Really?
Yeah, they have different types of... Yes, I'm going to make a video. They have the rational garden with some type of...
human input.
Human input and plants that you can use and eat and like a pergola and some organization of the space.
Did I walk by that garden?
Yes, but because it was being renovated, we didn't...
Oh, that construction blocked it. Right. So you're saying that you could go to the garden, and within your view, you can see the rough anarchy side, and you can see the orderly side within one view. They're quite close to each other.
Yes, and for example, if you walk in that street, you don't see the entrance. And that's done like that on purpose.
Wow, that's neat.
You can go in, but it's like you have to discover the garden and the entrance.
Wow.
It's like you are the key. And
it's like Comenius is at that point before the print becomes too much of an environment, starts to numb everybody, and everybody gets lost in the rabbit hole of print assumptions. He's at that balance point. The retriever, they know the best of the medieval pre-literate sensibility, and they know the best of the literate. They're in the middle. That's pretty comprehensive.
Yes, and he thought the garden is also one of the classrooms you have to engage. Like there is the school, the garden, the city, the church.
Different environments. Wow, that's
different environments. Yes, and he also, for example, they also have like a small stage, because he also thought everybody should engage in theater, in theater, acting. Yeah, like taking different roles. Because now, when you take another role, it's like you become other person, and you sort of think about the situation of other persons, and this gives you more understanding of your society, for example.
Yeah, you become.
And he went into multimedia.
yeah, fragment into multimedia. That's right. Now, Carol wanted to say something.
Just about the farm that we're supporting. It's very much like that. It's biodynamic, organic. It looks wild, but then when you go in through an area where there's some trees for windbreak, then you'll find plants and gardening. You'll have areas with chickens, areas with rabbits, areas with the goats. So it's not a farm which is just rows and rows of boring plants. And as I was saying earlier, he's got about 100 different plants and fruits and vegetables he grows throughout the year. He's got a pond and the koi, it's tilapia fish in it. And he could farm the fish, but what he does is uses the fish shit, whatever it's called, as fertilizer.
The feces.
Yeah. So, the wildness is the biodynamic aspect. That's Rudolf Steiner. who probably gets it from these earlier philosophers.
Yeah, what do you think the Bohemians had an influence on Steiner? Do you know anything about that, Roxy?
I suppose yes, because the grandchild of Comenius came to Berlin, and he grounded the science academies and the public schools, and all this had a big influence in all Germany. All the ideas of Comenius were very important.
Right. Now, the new up-to-date fact that you discovered in your email you sent me is that Václav Havel was influenced by Comenius. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, he's from Prague, and in Prague, Comenius is like Jefferson, or this type of person that are like the big men of the Czech Republic, and most people know about him because he's the great pedagogue. And this friend of Zappa lived in Prague, and he thought he could change society by following Zappa's example, by making rock in
orchestrated freakout, doing an orchestrated freakout.
And he called his band the Plastic People of the Universe, inspired by Zappa, and he had a lot of humor, and he really had an influence in the society. He became a politician, and he was both influenced by Amos Comenius and Zappa.
Yeah, that's a really good case closed there, Carolyn. If you want to link Comenius and Zappa, it comes through Havel, who wanted Zappa to be his cultural representative. So that means, and Havel was put in jail for his musical theater and bands. They named it after the song Plastic People on Zappa's second album. Yeah. And so these guys get just, I guess, dribblings of Zappa coming into their culture through the Cold War. And they picked up the idea of Plastic People, which is just one of many of Zappa's concepts, but they made a big meme out of it, and were in prison for it. And when the police were trying to interrogate them, they would punch out Václav and his band members and say, "We're going to beat the Zappa out of you." And so Václav knew they were going to beat the Comenius out of them.
The Comenius idea that you can educate people with theater and music, not only in the school, and it might be more effective to pass these memes, to pass these ideas, not in a classroom or with the traditional activism, but just, for example, making fun music. People engage in a concert, and they demanded also audience participation. He was really influenced by Zappa. And this audience participation changed the society. He became a politician.
And it's interesting. How did they change society? Well, you bring in McLuhan. The technologies came in, made the Soviet bureaucracy irrelevant. So Václav and Havel and those guys didn't have to do anything. They just had to wait it out. And then the society collapsed on its own weakness, and that was called the Velvet Revolution. So you can even bring in McLuhan. Havel, he may not have fully understood McLuhan, but he ended up being a product of McLuhan because the changes in the environment forced Czechoslovakia to be free of the Soviet bureaucracy. They were forced. Soviet bureaucracy was forced to give up their empire. It was making them too inefficient to even be part of the global economy. So you got McLuhan, Zappa, and Comenius coming together in Václav Havel.
Yes, and another thing I see in common is all the vortices are aware of the fall and the ascension. This is a big thing in the work of all of them, how to use technologies to expand yourself and go back to your place of power. Of course, they don't say it like this, but in a way it's what they're trying to do and motivate people to explore, to go back to their place of knowing and their place of power.
Yeah, the serious artist, McLuhan says, has to include theology. And there's a lot of theology in Zappa. There's a lot of theology engaged in the Vortices, Lewis, Joyce, Pound, and Eliot. I don't know if Andy Warhol was geared into theology, or name a famous artist today. Who's that guy in England? Darius or Damien or somebody? Who's the top pop artist out of Britain? His name begins with D. Is he a theologian? Not that you have to do traditional theology, and that brings in Ion, who is the ultimate theologian. Ion is obsessed with clarifying theology.
Yes, and it's all about, we will call it, like maybe Zappa would, it's a big trip. It's the trip of man, of fallen man, and finally going back to the big no, to the completion, and to the power, the big odyssey.
Yes, the big odyssey. Bert, are you here yet? There's someone in Anonymous, but they're not speaking. Bert usually comes in around this time, but he's not here. Oh, maybe he's one. Is that Bert? Is that you, Bert? No.
And well, I see this as a attempt to deliver the non-physical message in many different formats.
Yes.
Through history. The great artists and scientists are engaging this trip, and they're doing the metanoias and their explorations and presented it to the audience too.
Yeah, you could define art or science or invention is the interplay of art, science, media, and nature. There are four aspects. Anybody who's doing anything has to be involved with art and science and media, meaning new technologies, and nature. Those four environments. So you find the great artists that work on those four levels. Do they teach that in school? I don't think so.
No, actually they fragment you.
Right. Now, I want to just check with Brian. Brian's a long-time Ionette. Brian, you're not usually here. Are you quite bored with our discussion or interested? Do you have anything you want to add to it?
Yeah, hang on a second. Let me, the fuck is the wrong one? Let me turn my other device off.
Since we don't have Bert here, you know Brian, Roxy, right? You've heard of Brian. You've heard him speak. He usually has some interesting point to make. And Brian is not a fan of Zappa. What? Points, plural?
I'm a fan of conspiracy theories, Bob.
Yes. Yes.
And I hit the mother lode on my conspiracy theory world. It's the most fucking ridiculous. Huh?
What is the mother? Are you going to tell us about the mother? Because Zappa was known as a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, Zappa would love this one. I mean, it's the most ridiculous, outrageous conspiracy theory you've ever heard in your life.
Okay, let's hear it.
Are you sitting down? You might want to sit down for this one, Bob.
I'm always sitting down, Brian.
Oh, okay.
I'm always sitting down.
Here's the conspiracy theory. You got these conspiracies out there, and their conspiracy is that they're telling everybody that the world is round, that it's a ball, it's a globe, that it spins at 1,000 miles an hour and travels around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour and travels around the Milky Way at 500,000 miles an hour. And then they have this Big Bang theory where, like the whole galaxies and the universes run away from the Big Bang at 670 million miles an hour. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You ever heard anything that ridiculous, Bob?
I've been. I'm not that impressed with it. I know it's ridiculous because Ion has spent a lot of time debunking those theories. Ion doesn't agree with them either. And Ionette would have to agree with you that that is a pretty crazy idea. But what's interesting is, and you might want to learn this, is that McClone explained why people were duped by that visual space. Man was flung to the edge of the universe with Copernicus and then, I guess, Galileo. And that center margin effect was what the printing press was doing on all levels of European society. So science adapted the printing press and made themselves be marginalized. And then include the kinetic movement through space and all those different statistics you made. That is totally a product of the printing press. Now, what do you think of that conspiracy? That the printing press made everybody believe what you just thought was ridiculous.
Right. In fact, when you, in fact, they must think it's funny, which it is funny. It's actually kind of fucking embarrassing when you finally come to realize it. But if you look at the numbers that they give you that I just rattled off, you find out that you're actually, being on the Earth, spinning and traveling through space, you're traveling at 671 million miles an hour. If you do the math, well, guess what that is? That's actually the speed of light. They're actually laughing and say, hey, we're telling you you're fucking traveling at the speed of light right now. But yet you're, I don't know, are you traveling at the speed of light or are you still?
Well, the speed of light is immediate perception. I am seeing, therefore I'm traveling at the speed of light. Now, Roxy, we brought in Bach at the beginning. Bach was trying to bounce off these kind of theories. Now, he would take the solar dimensions, right? And he would try to translate them into music? Is that what he's doing?
I think all these efforts of people like you trying to motivate people to get a new type of education by engaging the environment and exploring not only the labyrinth of the mind, but the perception and mystery landscape. And
well, see, Brian is looking at the figure. Brian, if you look at the figure,
I said you present the information until things start making sensical sense, and I love this phrase because it sort of embodies both the perception and the labyrinth of the mind. The sensical. Right. And it's a way of understanding not only with the labyrinth of the mind, but with something else that is maybe the autonomic or the spiritual gifts or something that is being activated. The interplay between all your senses is changing. And you have a new understanding of things. And, of course, being in the vortex, you start creating patterns. And most people go and create conspiracies because they are only seeing the figure, but they're not seeing the figure on the ground. They're not seeing the whole big picture. And there are many things that, like, for example, I remember at the beginning many people were freaked out by the chemtrails and radiation and all these things. And I was always very cool, just like saying all these things are part of the changes that we need. We need more carbon. We need more radiation. We need to create a new environment, and we have to adapt to this new environment. And on the one side, to adapt to the new environment is like you have to be able to digest these new ideas to recognize the non-physical and accept that things are not as you were told. And there are new explanations by Ion about what is happening, how our bodies function, our origins, what is going on, we're going back to our place of power, and he's just telling us to accept the mystery landscape instead of going into freaking out and a conspiracy or fighting against or trying to engage some type of activism that is not really going to change anything. We have to have this new position of taking the responsibility of the transformation, of the reset.
That's a very good point. And to take that responsibility, you change once your perception gets changed literally 180 degrees on your entire world, then you see everything is different. Your perspective is different, and then the way that you would look at the world, question the world, and even operate in the world will be vastly different than the way it is, let's say, right now or before.
Yes, and you start getting a different understanding of all these metaphors, of all these memes that have been coming back and back and back all the time through history, like, for example, the philosophical stone, that it's about the marriage between matter and spirit. But it's actually more the white stone and the icel. The alchemy is the chemistry of the ionic technologies. And then you start competing with this new information and understanding all these memes, all these metaphors, like the cloud. The heaven is not as we thought, but it's a new type of cloud, and like that you start overlaying with all these concepts, and everything starts making sense, and you start just connecting things, which I find it very fascinating how for example, Bob in the chart did all these connections, all this summary of the whole. And for example, Joyce will say, if everything was destroyed, they could recreate the whole universe with the Finnegan's Wake. And maybe that's also true for Bob's chart.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's like your recording, your version of the Zappa synchronicity, of the remixing of many different recordings, many different patterns, many different ideas.
Right.
And you compose it.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Zappa says in the Bob Marshall interview, he says you need to watch different news sources, C-SPAN, CNN, other things. So wherever he was operating, his methodology was look at different sources. And then McLuhan says, note the effects of different media. So, Brian, are you a conspiracy theorist? Are you missing out on the ground changes?
Say it again about the conspiracy in the ground.
You're pointing out the ridiculous conspiracy idea, and you say you're interested in conspiracy theories, and you're talking about this whole Galilean dynamic view of the solar system, or Newtonian view, is an idea you don't respect. But do you understand how the medium of the day made people accept that idea? That's the ground, the technology of the day. The main technology.
And you're saying that was the book when it came in with Copernicus, and the Bert. Well, see, and now what's happening with the electric environment? It's reversing it. Now the veil is thinning, and the apocalypse is happening.
Right. Now I say that's been most of the 20th century. That's the electric age. The new environment is ion, and we could say symbolized by the eye cell. There are new effects by a new technology, a new ground, which is ion, which you probably accept that idea.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Look, you know how let's say, ion came in, we all asked our questions, and then the big thing was, and you get certain answers, and then you say, well, you got to ask the questions again, and maybe you'll get a different answer. But now my perspective is, well, if you still have the same perspective as you did before, and even though you ask the same question again, but you still have the same perspective, well, it's a little bit insane to think that you're going to get something different. Now, you probably would get maybe a different answer from ion, but it's really not an answer to get you somewhere. It's more of an answer, I mean, for me, and in my opinion, it was more of an answer to fuck you up even worse, because your perspective is so fucked up. Literally, your perspective is so fucked up that no matter what answer he gives you, he ain't going to get you there unless he just comes right out and crams it down your throat hole, which, some he does, but a lot of it he didn't. But once your perspective changes, now I can honestly say that most of the stuff that I've heard Ion say over the years, it's like, holy shit. Especially the stuff that I really didn't get at all. I'm like, I don't get what the hell he's saying. I don't even know what the fuck he's talking about, really. Well, now it's like, holy shit, the lights are going off. It's like, now what he said that I thought was just, some of the stuff he said was ridiculous and I didn't get. Now it absolutely makes perfect sense. Once the paradigms have been shattered and you've done a 180 on your perspective and all this other stuff.
Right, so your perspective has changed now. Was the RNA drops a causative factor in that? The causal?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'd say, it had an effect. But in the beginning, let's say the first couple of years on the drops, I really noticed it. But now I've been on the drops for so long that it's I don't know. Everything that was so different before becomes so normal. So you almost think, well, there's nothing going on. I don't think there's nothing going on, but yet I know that there is. That's the reason. I keep taking the drops. I like the drops, but absolutely, I'd say that. And I say the drops are part of it. And I say that because my perspective has changed, I now have even a more profound sense that I think these RNA drops are way more than what I even thought they was before.
Right.
Because Ion said that to me. He says, you have no fucking idea what you have right now. And I'm like, well, okay, yeah. It's like, okay, I'm taking this great supplement and it's doing this and that. But then when your paradigms get shattered and your perspective changes even more, it's like, now that has a whole new magnitude. Those words have more magnitude of what he said.
Right, and we're saying here in the Zappa context that Comenius, the Vortices, James Joyce, Wyndham Lewis, McLuhan, and Iondom, and Zappa, and then Iondom, naturally follow together and are anticipating you speaking about yourself this way. They were advocating a citizen, to get to the point where they say what you say.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? What you're saying?
I think
go ahead, Roxy.
that people that won't recognize non-physical and don't engage in the transformation are going into that direction of thinking evolution is to become a cyborg and get a chip and implants, and they think they're going to be completed and expanded by technology, and they cannot understand how there will be any more evolution in a biological way. And they also get lost into conspiracy.
Which is that they are a victim of an agency. Now, there is an agency.
Yes, without the explanation of the ionic, nothing makes sense.
But they are victims. I mean, that's the thing. They are victims of the corporations.
Yeah. This comes out in the angel diagram. But the way Ian suggests how you battle it, how you non-battle it, how you bypass it, that's the important part. Ian says there's all kinds of conspiracies, but that's people scheming from their vantage point, and even says that you will meet some of these as you ascend and acquire bigger radiance. These people will note you and confront you. So that there is a reason.
But look,
it's a logical result of trying to make sensical sense of all the information you have on the internet. Then they don't have the completion of what Ian is saying, and of course they say, oh, there is something, which is the other meme that they call the Illuminati, and they think there is something trying to control them, and they see all this, the error and the drama and the horror that Matun explained with the electric environment. All these memes of the monsters and horror movies and the possession were so popular because people felt with their loss of identity that they were being possessed by something else, and that now the horror is terror. Now it's even more, and everything is toxic, and yes, there must be some Illuminati trying to conquer planet Earth, like Frank Zappa is making fun in all his plays.
Right. Now, Brian, you were laughing. What were you going to say?
Well, I mean, when I was listening to what Roxana was saying about, I wasn't following exactly, but she's talking about the Illuminati and the control, all of this, that, and the other. And with the electronic environment and the thinning of the veil, and with us being what I'm saying is we're in the throes. What's happening is we're in the throes of the apocalypse, meaning the awakening or the great revealing, and in that, it's like the phrase goes. The simple phrase is, know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. But in the middle of that is, know the truth. And when you find the truth, you will be troubled. You'll be troubled greatly, and then the truth will set you free. So there's that process that you go through, because people have been, they've been blinded, they've been hoodwinked, they've been, the fraud and the deception that's been committed on them is fucking off the charts. But see, now with the electronic environment, that's all coming down. And what you're going to see the world go through this fucking process of this great awakening. And this is what is fucking laid out in Revelations. This is why when I have this new perspective now, it's like, it's unbelievable how fucking literal this stuff actually is. Because Ian used to say this about the Bible, oh, it's so literal. I'm like, what are you talking about? This stuff ain't even fucking close to being literal. But then once you get these paradigms shattered and your perspective changes, you're like, holy shit, it is fucking literal. It's unbelievable how literal it is. But that's what I'm laughing about.
But the thing with conspiracy is that if you stay as a little man, your power is outside yourself, and you still think there is something else controlling your environment. Your outer kingdom is not affected by you and your power of creation, but by bigger powers.
Okay, well let me comment on that right there. Here's what I would say to that. It's like, let's say, I'm running around here and I say, I'm free, right? I'm coming into my power and I'm free and this blah 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 blah. Then something happens and then all of a sudden I realize, well, wait a second. Based on my world and how I live, the fucking opposite is going on. I ain't fucking free. I'm enslaved. I'm a fucking slave. That's what's going on. But see, there has to be, and for me, there has to be that awakening. There has to be that realization. Because if you're a fucking slave and you think you're free, what are you going to do about it? You ain't going to do nothing about it. You're just going to keep going down the fucking rabbit hole. You're going to be running around, keep going around and around in the rat race. But once you realize that you're a slave, that you've been a slave, well, see, now when Ion says, hey, come back into your place of power, now it makes sense. Now I realize I'm a slave, and now that I do realize I'm a slave, I can change it. I can do something about it. You see what I'm saying? And then I can come, and then I know the difference between, I really know the difference between power and authority other than some silly fucking cliche saying about it. You actually know it, and then you start actually living your life knowing and being different in power and authority, coming back into your place of power. You know what it is. In fact, today they had they was replaying Moses' top 10. And when you look at the here's what I thought about looking at the top 10, Moses' top 10. You go through the 10 Commandments. And I was like, hey, this is just libertine gospels. But there was always something that got me in the when you go through the Bible and you talk about these certain individuals like Enoch and some of the others that end up, walking with God. One of the things that was always said was, God says, you kept my commandments, right? You kept them, and so now you're walking with God. But when I'm listening to Ion go through the 10 Commandments, it's like, well, fuck, if you can't do all of this stuff, and it's all, the libertine gospel, so to speak, well, fucking everybody should be, regardless of what they're doing, everybody should be following the 10 Commandments. But the fact is that you're not. Because when you're a fucking slave, you're worshiping false idols. You're committing adultery. You actually start to understand what adultery is. You know when one of the commandments is don't take the Lord's name in vain. You know what that fucking means, because when you're a slave, that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking your own name in vain. And this is what I'm saying. So then, once you realize all this, then you can actually start coming back in your place of power, because now you know where you are, whereas before I didn't. You think, I think, hell, I'm free and I'm doing everything right. But then once you get into it, you realize what's going on, you're like, uh-oh, no, I guess I didn't. Any comments?
Hey, Roxy, I'll say this. Brian is able to say what he said today, just now, because Comenius lived, the Vortices lived, McLuhan lived, and Zappa lived. That made Brian come to this awareness. Oh,
okay,
and I
explain
that. Explain that?
Yeah, just simply explain, because those individuals that you just named lived, I was able to say that. Was it because
because they anticipated iron. They anticipated Iondom, and it's Iondom that changed you. And our thesis as we explore Zappa is to show the prefigurings of Iondom, which I don't think Zappa fans will accept, but we're saying. But we're going to say it anyways and do it for many hours, so that we're up to 80 hours now, over 80 hours of this thesis. So it's a recognition of the influence of the non-past on your future, on your non-future, in the non-present. and you didn't hear me earlier, I was describing the environment, the Android meme qualities today have no present. There's no present happening. That's why everybody's recording everything, hoping that there is a present to be recorded. And those ideas included in Wyndham Lewis and Zappa and McLuhan. Comenius, I'm not sure if I can say Comenius was fully aware of what was coming, but he certainly tried to balance what he had to work with. So he showed the balanced perspective. You want to say anything to add to that, Roxy, or are we finished with that topic? No, Roxy? Roxy went to the bathroom? Let's see. No emails. We're waiting. So, Brian, we normally have Bert here, and Bert is laid up. He can't make it tonight. So we're going to have to move into some other aspects of Zappa. If we get Roxy back, I don't know where she is right now.
Yeah. So who are some of the others? You know, you mentioned Zappa and LaRouche. Is it all your holy offices? Like the
No. I played some recordings that I did with Ion yesterday and the day before, or today and yesterday. At the end of the music, I recommend you listen to them because a good chunk of the topics were evoked by Roxy's searches into some of the interests of Zappa, and it led to this whole new information. And so she brought in Comenius, who I didn't know. And Comenius lived in the, say, 1640s and 50s. And so Comenius was added to what I was already talking about: Wyndham Lewis, James Joyce, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, and W.B. Yeats. And then we added Zappa to that and McLuhan. And then Roxy likes to mention my part here and there. And then we say it gets completed by Ion. So your statement tonight is an example of what we haven't done this.
I want to be clear. All the names you just named, you're lumping them into what category now? What's the category you're lumping them into?
People explaining that the apocalypse is a daily act and involves not being aware of the environment you're in, and then creating a counter-environment to the environment that's duping you. That's what's common between Comenius, the Vorticists, and McLuhan, Zappa, and Ion.
Mm-hmm. But it's not limited to those individuals.
Pretty well limited to them. Why emphasize people who weren't as dramatic, weren't as revolutionary, weren't as effective?
But what about the founding fathers of the United States, like Jefferson and Washington and Adams, and are they not considered in that category, or is that something different?
No, that's what Ion. Yeah, Ion brought them in. Now, Zappa, we have a video of Zappa trying to retrieve the values that those people represented. He does it in an ironic voice, though. But I would say those characters, Henry VIII, Zappa, Ion has mentioned many people. Ion, Nostradamus, the minor prophets, the major prophets, Ezekiel, Enoch. Ion has mentioned all kinds of people like Marie Henrietta at the beginning of the 20th century. Ion has completed what Zappa and the Vortices were on about. It's just that the Zappa and Vortices were ahead of their time. They were expressing the ionic, decades before. And, what are they about? They're about the making of the environment. So they actually include everybody. The Vortices, the Zappa, the McLuhan, the Comenius, they included the idea of everything, anywhere, all the time, for no reason at all.
So what would you say the process is of creating your environment? What does one do? What did Zappa and all of them that you mentioned, what do they say an individual does to create their own environment?
They explored the new technologies. Remember, Zappa's band was called Mother of Invention. Mm-hmm. And they all look at the present and figure out the limitations that were inherited from the past, that don't acknowledge the changes that the present is bringing forward. The present. They're not science fiction projecting ahead to the future. They do make science fiction art forms. People think they're science fiction, but they're just describing the present. And then Ion comes in to say that they've always been the present of everything so far. And we're in a world now where the present doesn't exist. That's why Ion has come forth to create a non-present vibrancy, or not limited to time, not limited to the past, present, future continuum.
Right. But see, I get that. I remember Ion used to get after me about, because I used to always want to get into the woo-woo stuff, was what he called it,
right.
And yet it's a popular topic on your show, about no time and parallel worlds and other yous and this, that, and the other, and sometimes I don't know. With my new quote perspectives now, I would be able to ask new questions that would, in my opinion, like if it would better pin down exactly what he means when he says these things. Because, you can say certain phrases about time or other worlds or other yous, but unless you pin it down specifically, it could be vague and nebulous. Well, you could go all over the place with it. All I can say is I know what it is for me now in this place. Now, that doesn't mean that's the way it is forever and ever, just right here, right now. That's just, that's where I am. That's what Ion would say all the time. You are where you are. Doesn't mean it's good or bad, because that's a false premise. What matters is you find yourself where you are, and then at that point it's where you go from there.
Well, you say you would like to ask some questions. Do you know that Ion is coming back? Did you know that?
Well, actually, I never even knew he left. Until somebody said, Ion hasn't been on the show for a while. I said, I didn't even know.
Well, you're not tracking our show weekly. You're not keeping up with what's happened in the past 3 months. Okay, well, just thought if you thought that he wasn't around, he wasn't, but it's coming back soon. So I'd be interested in what questions you came up with in your replay, whatever you would like to hear. Now, here's something. What are the lampstands for you, Brian? Have you defined them? Have you come up with a satisfactory meaning?
No. In fact, I would see, going through Revelations, he touched on a lot of it, and Genesis for that matter. But, based on my perspective now and what was said then, it's like, okay, well, we would have to develop that way further than where it is currently, so to speak. Like
right.
If somebody gets the Revelation series and the Genesis series, it's like there's a whole lot further you can go and be far more specific on certain things, and also different levels. Because see, it's like what I notice when you can talk about anything. There's different levels to that situation. For example, you can take like when Jesus got crucified on the cross. Well, I always say, well, the cross is chromosome 14. Okay, well, that's on the molecular level, right? Well, there's other levels. That same situation, you can say, okay, that's chromosome 14, but that's a molecular level. Well, you can go on out to, whatever level you want to, and this is what it means based on a different level. So you got molecular, cellular, all the way out to
we don't need to go into it, Brian. We've got to get back into Zappa. So here's what Ian said. Told me the other day that Brian still hasn't figured out the lampstands. So why don't you, when Ian's back, would you come in and start asking? Because it'd be like you asking over again. I invite you to have the microphone and see where you can get with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and to me, it has a very different meaning, especially when you start going through the seven layers of heaven with the seals, trumpets, thunders, and vials. They have a very different.
Let me add to that. You're talking about Genesis. Roxy's been listening to Genesis a lot, and she's been inspired by things said in Genesis to bring in Comenius and Zappa and Vorticus and McLuhan. Is there something, Roxy, you could say about Genesis that might relate to Brian's interest in Genesis?
No, I don't think I can relate to Brian, but I see how the exegesis, all these metanoias, all these recording, remixing, and using like your environment being like your recording studio where you are composing comes back all the time. And maybe what we called in the last video the 12th thunder is like before all these technologies were thunders, but now ion is the cloud. It's like after the thunder is the cloud.
Yeah. What do you think of that, Brian?
Well, I didn't exactly follow, but she doesn't have to. When you ask Roxana to say something about Genesis, pertaining to me, it's like, well, I would say, well, leave me out of it and just say, if you wanted to, what your perspective on what was laid out in Genesis.
I just said it.
Yeah, I guess I should have. Let me say this,
Yes, it's like
I should have said it this way.
For example, the Finnegan's Wake, it's another version of the Genesis. And the work of McLuhan is another version of the Genesis. And you have both the importance of the word, of the logos, and the chemistries, and the division of day and night, and all these things. And I see that the non-physical has been putting these ideas in many different formats so that we finally get it with Ion explaining the real meaning of all these things being said and making us aware of the vortex and
well, isn't there a theme?
Roxy,
isn't there a theme in Genesis that you see developed in Comenius, Zappa, and Finnegan's Wake and McLuhan? There was some theme in Genesis, some aspect of it. Was it the vortex? What was it in Genesis?
Well, the technologies.
Technologies, right. The thunders.
Yeah, and we speak in thunders. Like in antiquity, people believe God speaks with the thundering. And these are all metaphors about the way we create. McLuhan said, the logos is not only the language, the words, but all type of human outerings, objects and technologies are also part of the communication. And they be understood as words. And
spells. Casting spells.
Yeah. The spell casting is part of the effect of the medium. The medium casts a spell and creates a certain distortion, a bias.
Right. Well, we talk about words, we talk about language, and writing words. Right. Writing. When you write words, you spell the words, spelling, casting spells, and I think that's the reason. In the beginning, Ian was big on knowing exactly what the hell you mean based on the words that you say or the words that you write. Now, he never come right out and said anything about casting spells, but from when I've gotten into it, makes perfect sense.
Well, the thing with alchemy is like we forgot when we fell. And there was this sort of remembrance that we create somehow with words.
Right, that could be part of the process of creation. When you create with words, you're part of that creation is casting spells, and you don't know it.
This alchemy was like a distortion of the real chemistry that is the I cell and the real power of your logos, of the composing with words, with frequency.
What's the word you say? Are you saying lotus?
Logos.
Logos, okay.
You know what the Logos is, Brian?
No.
The Logos is in the Bible where it says in the beginning was the Word. Well, back in Greek and Latin times, they called it Logos. So it means word. The big word.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning was the Logos. That's what Roxy's talking about.
Right, but then you got to figure out what the word is or what the logos is. It's funny. See, the way I think about it now when we talk about revelations, what is revelations? What's revelations when it comes down to it? To me, revelations is the creation of God. Now,
Brian, is singular.
You're eternal.
No, Brian. It's the book of Revelation. It's singular. Don't say Revelations plural. It's singular.
Okay, fine, the revelation. The revelation is the creation of God. Now, you're putting an eye on your God, I'm God, right? And you're eternal. So you've always been, you are, and you always will be. But we're trying to lay out, this process that we've gotten ourselves into, which I guess would be the fall, right? When we talk about the fall and you don't remember what happened, the separation of power. Okay, so then what Revelations is, it's the creation of God. And then you're going from Revelation, the creation of God, to Genesis. And then in Genesis, so to speak, you get back to God. You create the garden and you create, and then there you go. You're back to creation again. You create, your own universe, your own world, heaven, earth. You form an image of yourself from the dust, and then you breathe life into it.
Okay, that's all fine and dandy. As I was saying, beautiful words, Brian, but it couldn't be hardly further from the truth. Anyways, we got to start bringing Zappa in. Now, Roxy, have you got another hour? Is that what it is? An hour and 20 minutes? According to your schedule? Oh, yes. There she is. I think she. Oh, okay, you're here. So you've got another hour. Okay, let me just see if Bert, did you come in, Bert? Bert apparently can't make it, but someone just came in the style of Bert. So I guess that's not Bert. So Brian, thank you for your treasure of wisdom. I'm going to mute you. We're going to go into some Zappa details, which you may not be interested in, but we will try to relate it to what you're saying, because Zappa has a beginning of the universe scenario. He has a genesis in his creations. He's talking about a sofa and a squat the pig.
Right.
That was.
And the only thing I would say is that the beginning is a false premise, but the beginning is only the beginning based upon the fall, the separation. That's all. But it's all.
Do you now, with your expanded awareness, do you see the Bible as actually a document?
Fuck yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is.
No. What was I going to say? Here's what it is. It's a document for the little man. Do you agree with that?
Well, fuck yeah. Hell yeah, that's exactly what it is. And then people, you know, they talk about the Bible and they say, oh, the Bible's all fucked up because it's all about fucking blood and guts and people getting this, that, done to them. That's exactly what fucking happens. They're telling you straight out exactly what happens once you separate yourself from your power and then you go through this process of getting back. It's not fucked up. Those are perfect words, in my opinion, what you just said.
Yeah, it's a documentary of the effects of life as a little man.
Yes.
Okay, well, good. All right, so Frank is updating that, and I'm going to go into some materials from Frank that's for those that are into Zappa. So I have to mute you, Brian, so that we
finally.
Yes, Roxy, let's be polite. Brian brought in
it was fun. People. It was fun engaging with you again. I look forward to it soon.
All right. Well, if you hang out, I doubt if you will be hanging out, but I'll be available in an hour or so after Roxy's gone, and I'm going to play some more Ion. So if you call back or stay here, there's more things that we could get into, but I can't in this context. So I'm going to mute you, and we're going to... Roxy, we're going to do some more of the LP, the list of 179 names, okay?
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so the last one we did was Sacco and Fanzetti. Number 36 is Gene and Eunice, R&B artist, whose hit This Is My Story was a favorite of Zappa. It was covered live by him in 1981. I don't know if we might have mentioned this, but This Is My Story, that's an archetypal statement. That's what Brian was telling. That's what I'm doing. That's what you're doing. We're telling our story.
Yes, and this is very interesting because in a way he's telling you, you get educated everywhere. And when he's presenting all his gurus, all his influence, all the things he had been curating to pass it on to you, like Ion says, you're presenting the information for people to engage it, but that's the only thing you do. You're not telling them you have to do this or that.
Yeah, you're telling your story. Leonard Cohen has a song from way back, and this guy's hanging out with the gods, and he says, could I sing my song before I turn to gold? That's what the little man does. Little man expresses himself. Little man must say his story before he goes into the silence, goes into the anonymity of the ascended. And so you have modern media, you now have the function of media. The extension of storytelling itself has come alive. That's the end of a meme. It's storytelling itself. The process of storytelling is now providing the opportunity for you to tell your story. You get that?
Right.
Okay, 37. 37 is Robert Kraft. Do you know anything about Robert Kraft? You recognize the name?
No.
He was an American conductor known for taking on a number of modern and classical works, including the likes of Flores and Pierre Boulez. Frank Zappa appreciated his efforts, even though he publicly complained that the performances by Kraft were sometimes inaccurate. So that's part of the reason Frank exists. He's going to correct somebody. So he lists someone who had the influence of doing inaccurate performances.
Yeah, that's interesting too.
Yeah, that's technical information.
He's going to show us how to be a satellite conductor.
Right.
Like, you're not doing it right.
and so that's an influence on Frank. It's not that Kraft is bad, but that Kraft had set a standard that Frank feels should be corrected. So Frank is motivated by Robert Kraft. And 38 is Carl Greenhouse. It says, unverified personage, thought to be in Los Angeles area club owner. He may have been a partner along with Whiskey A Go-Go owner Elmer Valentine in the Trip Club, at which the Mothers opened for Andy Warhol's Exploding Plastic Inevitable show, featuring the Velvet Underground in 1966. Next guy, Dave Ernie, A-E-R-N-I, bass player who worked with Zappa at PAL Recording Studio in Cucamonga. That's the Paul Buff studio. You notice in that documentary of the suburbs around L.A. on Ontario that I sent you the other day, they tried to make this movie interviewing people who knew him before he went to L.A. One of the guys they showed was Paul Buff, who looked like a little dwarf, an amazing-looking character. I spoke to him on the phone back in '99, but he certainly didn't look like what I expected. Do you remember that guy? The one with the weird...
he looks like Rumpelstiltskin.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. He could be... He created the environment for Zappa. And he could be the Rumpelstiltskin behind Zappa. You know, that's a very good image of him. Yeah, I think that's what I didn't get. I was looking, I said, what's this guy, dwarf, a fairy? But I didn't realize he's Rumpelstiltskin. He's actually, if I looked like him, I'd be embarrassed. It'd be tough to walk around looking like him, considering the way people judge your appearance. And that he was a genius in the recording studio. He trained Frank a lot. And he made a nice statement. He said, I influenced Frank, and Frank influenced me.
Yes,
so
and
Dave,
that's the thing with Zappa. It's amazing how he wanted to share what he discovered, not like a more than teacher, but just to create with everybody, to compose with everybody. And there's another video which I found very interesting, how he will ask this guitarist and percussionist, I always forget the names, and to come over and play with him, and he will tell him, I'm going to teach you a song. And he will start playing, and he will learn that part. And after 2 years, he will then say, oh, do you remember that song? Yes. and Frank will say, not really, I forgot, but this is the next part. And he will teach him the next part. And that will go on and on and on for years. This dialogue.
That was Steve. The musician was Steve Vai, V-A-I. Steve Vai.
And he was doing that with everybody. Like, his interaction was also a type of learning and teaching. He will learn from everybody and teach everybody. And that's how you engage.
I agree.
Yeah,
it's like he had something to teach you in 1975, and if you show it in 1985, he had something to teach you, but it wasn't necessarily connected to that period 10 years before. Though it could be connected because there was the conceptual continuity. But so Frank was always had something to engage you with.
Yes, and actually he also saw that he had to intervene the most environments he could, and he will see his interviews and his broadcasting in any type, in any form, as part of his pedagogical efforts to make you understand the vortex.
Yeah, that's why he was outraged in Rolling Stone magazine. He said, "You guys are presenting me as an entertainer. I'm not an entertainer." That proves
and so
pedagogical point.
His television appearances, his interviews, his performances, all his recordings, he always records all his concerts to remix, but also as part of his pedagogic enterprise.
The project object.
All his writings. Yeah.
Right. The project object, so he's got the word object there. Carolyn Guertin says object is obsolete, but I think Frank knew that. He also had another term, event/organism. An event, but it also was an organism. It's a project, it's ongoing, but it's an object. It's both. He's in the interval. Again. So Dave Airney was a bass player who worked with Zappa at the PAL recording studio in Cucamonga. He co-wrote Love of My Life with Zappa. That was recorded by the Mothers for the Cruising with Reuben and the Jets album. Number 40, Bob Keane, Keane, president of the Delphi record label, producer and manager of the late, great Richie Valens. Misspelled Keane by Zappa. I guess Zappa on the album had it as Keene. Nick Vinay, producer at Capitol Records, based in Hollywood, would later sign Frank to an ill-fated deal to produce the Lumpy Gravy album. Jim Economides, producer at Capitol Records, through whom Zappa was able to release the 1963 PAL studio track, The Big Surfer. So he and Paul Buff probably made that. I don't know, well, Frank did. I don't know if Paul Buff was, but he probably was. That same year, 1963, Zappa pitched some of his more standard commercial tracks to Jim Economides, who rejected them. So this guy, he turned Frank down, and he makes the famous list. Number 43, Alois Haba. That's Alois, second name Haba, a Czechoslovakian composer. Maybe you've heard of him. Sound familiar to you?
Again, what was the name?
Haba, Alois, Alois, second name Haba, Haba.
Yes, actually, when I was researching the Plastic People of the Universe, I saw that name.
Yeah, see, he's Czechoslovakian, and Frank is talking about him before he knows about the Plastic People and Václav Havel. So he may have influenced Václav Havel.
Of course,
Havel might have.
All these environments are always very, very small, and in a city like Prague, people must hear about each other and know each other. You know, you get to you hear about the studios or the people playing, and most composers also want to know what others are doing, and I suppose, of course, they must know each other or heard each other.
Well, here's what it says about him. Czechoslovakian composer, a pioneer in the field of microtonal compositions, which use the smallest intervals possible between notes to create some very interesting harmonic relationships, not unlike the effect of a tape being subtly sped up or slowed down. He was possibly an influence on the tape collage experiments that Zappa would piece together over the next couple of years. That would be 67, 68, 69. Did you take any courses or do any tape collages or tape collage experiment? Did you work with microtonal compositions?
Yes, in Mexico there's a very famous microtonal composer. He's called Julián Carrillo, and he makes very interesting music. I really like what he was doing, and I think this going into the microtone, trying to divide the intervals between the notes, and the interval concept is very interesting because McLuhan talks about the interval being the interval between figure and ground being where the action is.
Right.
And composers start living the tonality, the idea of the central sun, and like in quantum physics, they're trying to go micro, to go into the little intervals. I suppose it's a reflection, a mirroring of the quantum, trying to go into these micro tonalities.
The non-visual, going into the non-visual.
Yes.
Even though it sounds, it's still visual. It's just tiny visual. The Mexican guy, were you talking about the guy who does the player piano?
No, that's Konrad Nakarov. That's actually American.
Nankarov. What was the name you said?
Julián Carrillo.
Oh, okay, Julián Carrillo. Okay, number 44, Leo Ornstein, American composer and pianist, a major player in the early avant-garde musical movement. His use of the tone cluster, a dense-sounding chord made up of 3 or more consecutive notes in a scale. That was a huge influence on Zappa, notably in his piano compositions. The tone cluster would go on to become an important part of Zappa's compositional insignia. Have you noticed the tone cluster in Zappa?
Yes. He will, for example, there were moments where everybody in the band would play like a big, amazing chord. Like in this second, everybody plays this big chord, like very complex harmony. Like he will make a sign and everybody will have to be there. Boom! And he will make this in the middle of a solo. He will make this. No. It's like a chord is different tones played at the same time.
Okay. So usually, what's the category?
You have 3 notes in a chord, but there are more complex chords. And he will create chords like everybody here, boom.
Right.
At these times.
So this guy, what did he do? Let's read that again. Leo Ornstein, his use of the tone cluster. So what you're calling a dense-sounding chord made of 3 or more consecutive notes.
Cluster. That's the way they're called, clusters.
So Frank would get the band individually to do clusters.
Well, the whole band was doing a mega cluster. You know, instead of just, for example, the keyboard playing this chord of 3 notes, he will make everybody to play a note to make a mega cluster chord.
It has to be 3, but it can be way more. A dense sounding chord or 3.
Like many notes at the same time. So as much as you can. It's a cluster. It's like a very complex chord.
Have you ever heard of Leo Ornstein?
Maybe. The name sounds familiar.
Right. I mean, you might have had it in your studies, right? A teacher might have mentioned him.
Yeah, so it's like you heard so many people. It's like,
So, number 45 is Elvis Presley. says the first major white rock and roll singer to rise to prominence, and one of the most important and influential figures in the history of popular music, now commonly referred to as the King of Rock and Roll. That's Elvis Presley. 46, Barry McGuire, American folk singer who had a number one hit the previous year, that would be 1965, with the doom and gloom anthem Eve of Destruction, written by P.F.
I wanted to interrupt and go back to Elvis, because in the media it was not about the music and Elvis, but it was mostly about his pelvis and his dancing.
Yes.
That made him famous or prominent.
So that's, McLuhan says, teenage music, which in his day would be rock and roll, and then rock, was an environment, not music. So you're just proving it. They made a big deal out of his body language, not his music. It was more than the music.
For example, my mother used to tell me that in Mexico they will not show Elvis from the waist down because they found it too sexual or too aggressive. They will just show the face, and she was curious to see how he danced. What was the big deal about his dancing? They will not show it.
And she would be a young girl at that time. Did she ever get to see it?
Yes, after a while they had to. But at the beginning, they will not show it. But everybody was talking about it. But they will not show it.
That's what rock and roll is. It's mixed media. That's the thing. It's not... Everything since World War II or since rock and roll is not music per se. That's why McLuhan said rock is not meant for listening to. It's for pressing up against. For what Zappa calls bone conduction.
Well, that's the name, rock and roll. It's actually engaging in coitus and sex.
Yeah. Right. Rock and roll. So the teenagers insisted that they were engaging in music. They wanted their parents to like music, to like their music, and say, we've got talent. But the teenagers didn't listen to the only adult who corrected them, McLuhan. You guys aren't
yes, and we have to think that for many centuries, dancing was the only way young people had to approach each other. It was forbidden to be close. And I was watching a documentary about dancing in the Renaissance, and they were saying, you have to be aware of the smell of the person. Maybe you can see if this person is clean or not, of their conversation, if he's educated. And, dancing served like a dating chat line. In this moment of dance, you have to be aware of many things and see if this person was worth of further engagement.
Right. So that would be not just for moving about. It was a form of spying. So that they actually were using music for more than listening to.
Yes, it was the only way people could approach each other until very, very recently.
Right. All right, that's a good point. So we retrieve medieval communication there in rock and roll. At number 46, we were doing Barry McGuire, American folk singer who had a number one hit the previous year with the doom and gloom anthem, Eve of Destruction, written by P.F. Sloan, a songwriter who is pictured on the inside of the Freak Out album cover. So this friend of Barry McGuire was a friend of Frank's and was on the album cover. He went on to become a successful Christian singer-songwriter. So Christian musicians understand that music is not to be listened to. It's to be a form of propaganda. Or they don't get that, and they think the message that you're actually supposed to listen to modern music and have a Christian message. So hard to tell which side they're on there.
Mm.
If they understood that rock, and this Christian rock, was not a message-generating thing, maybe that's why people don't like Christian rock. It's defeating what rock is about. Rock is not a verbal semantic message. It's an environment.
Yes, and somehow McLuhan had this idea that it's not possible to be religious in the electric environment.
Right. Well, he said you couldn't be ethical. You couldn't have ethics. Now, he said we were moving into a great religious age, moving out of rational, print-oriented attitudes or sacredness, a different kind of sacredness. And it varies what he meant by a great religious age. Actually, Malcolm Muggeridge, Norm Mailer says, what, do you mean in numbers? And he goes, yes, in numbers. More and more people will be engaging religion. And he predicted holy wars. Now
yes, because I see New Age as another type of conspiracy. Like you have all this information and you're trying to make sensical sense of all this information presented to you. And some people try to make this sensical sense going into what they think is spiritual. And there is a lot of this retrieval of New Age and mystic and spiritual thinking. Like McLuhan said, we went east, but at the same time, it's not what McLuhan will consider real religion, the connection. Religion in Latin means to connect, religare, to reconnect. But the real reconnection is the I cell.
It's the what? The I cell?
The I. Yeah.
The I? Or are you saying the I? Or
I cell.
Yes, I cell.
Connect.
Yeah, I was just reading today, McLuhan didn't consider Buddhism or any of these other religions in the world as religions. Christianity was the only religion. So he was up against the global village tendency to merge and have an ecumenical movement. He actually was not impressed, and that would include New Age philosophies. So that
one of the reasons I was reading in the Medium and the Light is that he thought the Pentecost was the most important part of the Catholic religion, which is the transmutation, the resurrection, and the transmutation of the body of Christ, which is actually the ISO.
Right. Now, the Pentecost, is that part of Easter, or when is the Pentecost? What is the Pentecost?
It's all about the resurrection. And
okay. It's about Easter Sunday.
Yes, the whole meme of the Mass is what happened in the last dinner.
Right. Last Supper.
The Last Supper. Jesus said, "Here is my blood, here is my flesh," and you take it to be transmuted into this and be reborn as Christ.
Are you saying the Last Supper is part of the Pentecost?
Well, the Pentecost celebrates this whole thing about the Last Supper, the crucifixion, and the resurrection.
The whole bunch of it.
Yeah, and all these ideas of the transmutation and the ascension is what McLuhan saw as the most important. And for humans, that he was aware that it was all about, he was doing this exegesis from the fall to the ascension.
Right. It says here, in Christianity, Pentecost is celebrated 50 days after Easter Sunday, inclusively, i.e. 49 days with the first day counted, 7 weeks, hence its name. In Judaism, it goes into that. Pentecost falls on the 10th day after Ascension Thursday, 40 days after Easter. So, in the New Testament, Pentecost was the occasion of the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles. So, the thing that Ion talks about, the period after the crucifixion, the ascension period, that's, Ion says, very important. So the Pentecost is about that, right? About the important part.
Yes, and I would see that as a metaphor of the non-physical reappearing and talking again.
Right.
And the possibility to engage the ISO to really get this transformation experience for real. It's not some type of belief or metaphysical idea, but it's true. It's real, this transformation.
Yeah, it's an engagement. So, yeah, Ion does say that engaging non-physical the way we are able with Ion has never happened to humanity before. Very significant event, according to Ion. I mean, it's not channeling.
And that's what we're saying. Everything humans have been doing is about this moment. That's the metanoia, the exegesis, and the things that were put in many different formats and remixed.
Yes, and I hope the listeners are not interpreting us as sounding like a cult. We refute this idea daily when we talk to the Spirit, Holy Spirit.
But that's the thing. McLuhan helped us to understand how this genesis of technologies appearing and expanding on is part of this evolution. It's not a religion.
Evolution of communication. Yeah.
Yes, it's going. I was thinking when Ian says in the beginning, maybe the beginning, the real genesis is the non-physical talking, the beginning of the creation of the new environment.
Yeah, that's March 18th in terms of calendar. That's March 18th, 2009, when Ian started to talk. That's when Ian had arrived. The guff had maybe emptied or was really well on to emptying on that day. And then Ian spent a couple
the Android name is trying to imitate God or humans.
Right.
We were trying to imitate this process of creation of the Genesis that is taking part now. That this is the real beginning.
Yeah, I'm laughing at the image of all these preachers, lecturers, professors. They get up and they start talking to a group of humans. They're trying to be as great as Ion, and they're pretty puny compared to Ion's talking. They go for 30 minutes, and then they give up, and then they don't do it for another week, and then they try another 30 minutes. They take a stab at being Ion.
Yes, because the thing is, what I like is it's not a cult, because it's not like you were saying, someday we'll arrive someday. No, it's like, okay, here it is, here are the technologies, and here is the thing. You can engage this information, you can engage this substance, and you will see it yourself. And here it is. It's a fact. It's not fiction.
We don't have to do much. Okay, so that was a good statement. Don Julian, number 47, vocalist for the first integrated doo-wop combo. I didn't know that. Doo-wop combo, the Meadowlarks, later known as the Larks. Their single, The Jerk, was a favorite of Zappa. So their first integrated doo-wop combo. He was a vocalist for it. Tiny Tim, American vocalist known for his ukulele playing and distinctive soprano vocal range, would become a household name in What, you're laughing at the fact, distinctive soprano vocal range?
Yes, he's a ukulele player that sings soprano.
Right. Cool. Do you know him?
No, but I have to check it out.
Yeah, Tiny Tim would become a household name in America and elsewhere a few years later. He was acquaintance, if not friend, of Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
Cord Wainer Smith, number 49, American science fiction and political writer. Frank Zappa once said that he would take his complete works, Cord Wainer Smith's works, to a desert island. Theodore Sturgeon, American science fiction writer, had many short stories published in sci-fi magazines in the 40s and 50s, magazines of which Frank Zappa was a fan. 51, Robert Sheckley, another American science fiction writer, whose work was a staple of sci-fi magazines in the 1950s.
Yes, I find it very interesting that he will engage science fiction. That it's this extension of science with the fantasy.
Right.
And many of the things that are represented as science fiction have become reality. So it's very interesting how maybe some conspiracy theories say when there is in public, it's because these technologies are already there.
I would say a lot of them are already here. And in right beside us, like you can say, oh, it's right here. Somebody in the Pentagon has stored a bunch of good stuff for the next 30 years. I am saying no.
Yes, another thing, I was saying that Ulysses is the day and the night is the wake and the dream.
Yeah.
And all the thunders are coming from the nighttime, from the dream, from the parallel worlds. But you say it's not a dream. I don't remember what was the word you say.
James Joyce, through the Evergreens, when I talked to him, through the channel Michael Blake Reed, channeling 6,500 to 7,000 entities called the Evergreen, you could talk to various people. The Evergreens would bring people in. So he brought in James Joyce. And all the way through it, James Joyce expressed that Finney's Wake was not about a dream. And it was not a dream. And the way, what we did find out it was about the interplay of different media environments, how they ate the previous media environment. They were monsters. And each new media environment was a monster that was eating the previous environment. So he was talking about technology and the effects and the unfolding of them. That's what he said Finney's Wake was about. It was not a dream.
Yes, and that's the Finney's Wake is the greatest science nonfiction ever.
Right. Science nonfiction and science fiction, it's in the interval.
Yeah.
The postmodern term that Croker popularized is theory fiction, or maybe even Baudrillard did it. A theory fiction rather than science fiction, because science maybe was weak. It was hardware, and it was being obsolesced by software. So you moved to theory fiction or meme fiction. That was just for your information. In case anybody brings it up, you'll know what that means. All right?
Yes, and in many ideas of science fiction actually help us to digest better the new environments and the changes that are happening.
Yes.
Like they open
the present
our minds to accept the possibilities that otherwise will be too absurd, like alien life or teleportation or many multi-dimensions. the idea of the matrix, the hologram, and all these things somehow were easier to digest thanks to science fiction. And I think someday science fiction will be considered a major genre because there are big works of art there, and until now it hasn't been really recognized. But
not in the populist